Trump's worst nightmare just exploded in real time. And tonight, the judge didn't just rule against him. He ordered a massive payback that could collapse Trump's entire empire. We're talking power slipping away, chaos moving in, and a financial judgment so huge it threatens to tear the foundation out from under everything Trump built. His legal team is scrambling, his allies are stunned, and Trump himself is melting down as the truth closes in. Because this judge isn't backing off, no delays, no deals, pay now, or face consequences no president has ever walked into before. And here's where it gets even darker.
It does look like the fight between Trump and E. Jean Carroll, that is back on. Like, what's the latest legal twist and turn there?
Right. Well, the president and his legal team appealing to the Supreme Court, asking the High Court to take a look at that civil verdict back from 2023 that held Trump liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll during an encounter in a New York department store in the 90s, and then for defaming her decades later. Now,
when you strip away the noise, the insults, the rallies, the posts, what's left is a really simple question. Can a man who built his brand on "I'm a brilliant businessman" be held to the same basic standards as anyone else who fills out a loan application? That's what this New York fraud judgment is about. A judge looked at Donald Trump's books, looked at the numbers he swore were true, and said, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just spin. This was fraud. And now, after years of delay and denial, the bill is coming due, to the tune of roughly $450 million. Think about that scale for a second. This isn't a parking ticket. This isn't even a big corporate fine that gets tucked into a quarterly earnings report. This is a penalty so large it can reshape the man's entire business empire. The base judgment, around $355 million, is already historic. Add interest on top of that, because he got to use that money all these years, and you're knocking on the door of $500 million. For once, the numbers Donald Trump is dealing with aren't imaginary brag sheet numbers he cooked up himself. They're numbers a court has pinned to him as the cost of his own dishonesty.
The president has repeatedly denied her claims, but it was 11 months ago that the Court of Appeals, the U.S. Court of Appeals, actually upheld the verdict. Now again, the president is appealing directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. It is not known, Gotti, when the Supreme Court would make a decision as to whether to even take up this case.
Yeah, we'll be checking back with you a whole lot before then. Gabe Gutierrez at the White House tonight. Gabe, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.
And here's the key part. An appeals court has already taken a look. They said, yeah, some of this might be excessive as a fine, and they adjusted. But they did not overturn the basic finding. They didn't say, no fraud here, all good, everyone go home. They said the opposite. The fraud finding stands. The idea that Trump obtained money through deception stands. What's being negotiated now is not whether he did something wrong, but how much exactly he has to give back. That matters. It drives a stake through the argument that this is just political persecution and nothing else. Trump, of course, is not quietly sitting with that reality. He's furious. He's calling it a witch hunt, a political hit job, a weaponization of justice. He's telling his supporters that radical judges are trying to destroy him because they can't beat him at the ballot box. It's the same script every time. If he wins, the system is fair. If he loses, the system is corrupt. And his media echo chamber repeats it over and over, hoping that if they shout witch hunt loudly enough, people will stop asking a very basic question. What did the documents say, and were they true? Let's talk about those documents. This wasn't about one stray typo in a spreadsheet. The pattern, as described in the case, is real estate fraud 101. Take a building. In one context, like taxes, don't value it too high because then you'd owe more. But when you go to a bank and you want a bigger loan, suddenly that same building becomes a golden palace. Numbers jump, valuations soar. And a property that might reasonably be worth $100 million on the open market becomes 200 million or more on paper, year after year, property after property. A lot of people hear about this and think, isn't that just how real estate works? No. Yes, estimates vary. Yes, the market moves. Yes, negotiations happen. But there is a gigantic difference between negotiating over a reasonable range and straight up inventing fantasy values, then certifying those values as true in formal financial statements. If you or I told a bank that our house was worth 3 times what it's actually worth to get a bigger mortgage, and we signed our name to that and they relied on it, that's not savvy. That's fraud. And that's exactly why the judge ordered disgorgement, giving back the profits of that scheme. In fraud cases, the goal isn't just to slap you on the wrist. The goal is to make sure crime does not pay. You don't get to keep benefits you obtained by lying. Courts look at the difference between reality and the fiction you sold, and they say, that margin you created for yourself, that's going back. Add interest, because you have enjoyed that advantage for years, and suddenly you're staring at these massive numbers. Trump is also trying to frame this as the banks were happy, nobody got hurt. That line sounds clever until you actually think about it. Our financial system is built on the assumption that big players, especially big players, are telling the truth in their filings. If you create a universe where the most powerful can just make up whatever they want and shrug it off as creative, trust collapses. Borrowing costs go up. Markets become more fragile. If you rig the game at the top, everyone else ends up paying in higher risk, higher interest, or a crisis down the road. And let's be honest, if this were a small business owner inflating numbers on a loan application, nobody on cable news would be crying witch hunt. That person might already be serving time. There's a 2-tier system in this country, but it doesn't run the way Trump tells his followers. The soft landing tends to exist for wealthy, well-connected people like him. The fact that this judge in this case cut through some of that privilege is exactly why it matters so much for the idea of equality under the law. Look at Trump's behavior in response, and you see the deeper problem for democracy. Instead of saying, I disagree with this ruling, I'll appeal it, but I respect the court, he attacks the judge, smears the prosecutors, and tells millions of people that the justice system is illegitimate because it held him accountable. He's not just fighting his case, he's undermining faith in the entire legal structure that protects us all. That's dangerous, because if enough people lose faith in impartial courts, everything else can unravel. Contract law, voting rights, civil rights, environmental protections. All of it rests on the idea that the law is bigger than any one politician. And this judgment doesn't come in isolation. It lands on top of criminal cases over classified documents, investigations into his efforts to overturn an election, and civil liability for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll. You don't have to memorize the dockets to see the through line. This is a man who has treated rules, financial, legal, political, as obstacles for other people. For him, rules are there to be bent, stretched, or bulldozed if they stand in his way. The fraud judgment is just one more piece of that pattern finally catching up to him. Now imagine trying to govern or trying to run a national political movement under the weight of a $450 million fraud judgment. Every decision, every negotiation, every interaction with donors and foreign governments is now shadowed by the question, is this about the country or is this about his own survival? Is this policy or is this leverage to get more cash flowing into his world so he can cover legal bills and judgments? That's not some abstract ethics debate. That's a practical crisis of conflict of interest. There's also the human piece. Regular people in this country jump through insane hoops to get a mortgage. They fax documents. They send pay stubs. They worry if one late payment will tank their chances. They agonize over interest rates moving 1/4 of a point. Meanwhile, this guy was allegedly treating billion-dollar valuations like mood rings. Whatever made him look richest in the moment is what went on the page. And now when a court says, you can't do that, He wants to be seen as the victim. It's insulting to everyone who has ever played by the rules and paid the price. His supporters are being asked to accept a wildly warped moral universe. In that universe, lying to banks is fine if you're owning the libs. Courts are corrupt if they find against him, but totally legitimate when they rule in his favor. Journalists who report on the facts are enemies of the people, but partisan influencers repeating his talking points are patriots. If you buy into that long enough, it gets very hard to see where the rule of law ends and pure power politics begins. And that's exactly what authoritarian movements always try to do. They don't just attack specific rulings. They attack the idea that neutral rules exist at all. If everything is rigged, then the only question becomes, whose rigging is better for me? That mindset is poison for a constitutional democracy. We're supposed to be arguing over policies, taxes, healthcare, foreign policy, inside a framework we all basically trust. When leaders like Trump work nonstop to torch that framework over and over, they're not just defending themselves, they're weakening the country. The fraud case also tells us something about character. People show you who they are when they think nobody's watching, or when they think they can get away with it. These financial statements weren't campaign speeches. They weren't off-the-cuff rants at a rally. They were formal documents crafted and submitted over years, meant to persuade powerful institutions to give him better terms. That takes planning. That takes intent. You don't stumble into that kind of pattern by accident. And if someone is willing to misrepresent their own balance sheet to squeeze out more profit, are we really supposed to trust them with national security secrets? With the power to send soldiers into harm's way? With the ability to appoint judges for life who will interpret the laws the rest of us live under? The fraud judgment doesn't answer all those questions, but it puts a heavy thumb on the scale. It says, this is the track record. This is who you're dealing with. He also can't hide behind the idea that he's broke or helpless. Posting a bond of $175 million isn't something you do from a place of destitution. That's serious money parked as collateral just to pause the hammer for a little while. It shows he can move mountains when it's about protecting himself. The judge's message is, essentially, the pause was a privilege, not a permanent escape hatch. Sooner or later, the real payment comes due. If he decides not to pay voluntarily, the system has tools: asset seizures, liens, contempt rulings. None of those are dramatic, deep state inventions. They're the boring, mechanical gears of the same legal machinery that collects unpaid child support, that enforces settlements for workers, that holds corporations liable when they poison communities. When Trump calls that machinery corrupt, he's not just trying to escape it himself. He's chipping away at the very tools ordinary people use to get justice. This is why the outcome of this judgment matters even beyond Trump. If the courts stand firm and follow through, it sends a message to every future politician and every future self-made mogul who thinks they can brazen their way through fraud. Maybe you can't. Maybe there really is a line you can't cross without consequences. But if he somehow talks his way out of it, or if political pressure scares the system into backing off, it sends the opposite message. If you're loud enough, powerful enough, and ruthless enough, you can game the system and still walk away clean. We should also talk about what it means for us as citizens. It's easy to watch this from a distance, like it's a reality show episode called Trump's Big Legal Trouble, and forget that the stakes are ours. Our economy depends on credible financial information. Our democracy depends on people believing their courts are trying, however imperfectly, to be fair. Our social fabric depends on a shared belief that some things are still wrong, even if our side does them. You don't have to love every judge, every prosecutor, every lawyer to understand that the alternative to a functioning rule of law system is chaos, or rule by whoever shouts the loudest and threatens the most. And if we normalize the idea that fraud is fine as long as the fraudster says the right slogans, we're not just offending one man. We're telling every future leader that integrity is optional and that consequences are negotiable. In the end, This fraud judgment is a mirror. It shows us the gap between the image Trump sold, genius dealmaker, billionaire builder, self-made success, and the reality a court found, a man who inflated numbers, misled institutions, and has now been ordered to pay dearly for it. It also shows us something about ourselves, whether we still expect the same rules to apply to everyone, or whether we're willing to carve out exceptions for charismatic strongmen. If we still believe in the old idea that no one is above the law, this moment should matter. It should matter that a judge, scrutinizing evidence, said, "Enough. You don't get to keep the profits of your deception." It should matter that appeals courts upheld the core finding. It should matter that the bill is now due, not in the court of public opinion, but in actual dollars and cents. And if we want a future where presidents, senators, CEOs, all of them, think twice before abusing their power, that we have to care about what happens next. Will he pay? Will the courts enforce? Will the political system respect the outcome or try to blow it up with conspiracy theories and threats? Those are the questions hanging over this case now. Because this isn't just Trump's worst financial nightmare. It's a stress test for American democracy. Either the law is strong enough to outlast one man's ego, or it isn't. Either the truth in those financial statements matters in the end, or it doesn't. And the kind of country we end up living in will be shaped by how we answer that, not in tweets, but in what we're willing to accept and what we're not.